Let's move on to some good news. Actually, here are some white pills today.
Yeah, got a lot of white pills today.
Yeah.
So we covered a lot about the critical race theory being ramped up in UK politics to the point that the UK Parliament was being forced to do this. Like MPs were being forced to undertake critical race theory training.
Conservative MPs were being
Yes.
forced to do this, and only 40 abstained out of like 300.
Yes, which is just embarrassing for the Conservatives. But this sort of went on, and a lot of people were rightfully upset about this. And then the Undersecretary for Equality is Kemi Badenoch, came out and just flatline said that they were going to ban this in schools, at least. This is not going to be taught. This is wrong. This is also an evil ideology. And it's just like, all right, all the right things. Pretty good. And they've gone further. So her boss has come out and said that they need to get rid of unconscious bias training altogether because it's absolute nonsense and is just a waste of taxpayers' money, which I agree. So the first article here is from the BBC reporting that this is happening. Unconscious bias training to be scrapped by ministers. So it says in here that the government say there is no evidence it changes attitudes. There is no evidence that changes attitudes and is urging other public sector employers to end this type of training. So not just their department in the Equalities department, but every government department and every public body should be getting rid of this because it doesn't work and it's a waste of time.
To the Conservative ministers clearly listening to this podcast, well done. Have a gold star.
Yeah, you get the stick and the carrot. When you do good things, carrot. So, of course, the Civil Servants Union is outraged. How could you do this to us? It's like, I don't care. But they said, what are ministers going to replace it with?
Nothing.
Why would we? Like, this, if it doesn't work in its goals of finding racists, let's say, or training people not to be racist, then it's pseudoscience. It's complete hokum. And I was thinking what to compare this to, and I've got nothing else except witch dunking. So you in the medieval times, you dunk a witch, and if she fell to the bottom, then she was a witch and she needed to die. And if she floated, they would set fire to her because she was a witch and she needed to die.
Yeah.
So, sorry, no, if she went to the bottom, that proves she wasn't a witch, but she would die.
She died a virtuous Christian woman.
So she died either way. It was just complete pseudoscience to prove that this person needed to die. And this is the same thing. You're just like, we know you're a racist, so we're going to run this pseudoscience.
But how are you going to find the
racist.
witches?
Exactly. So now we've proven that this witch trial, racist trial, doesn't work. And the Civil Servants Union is like, yeah, but how are we going to find them then? It's like, it doesn't work. Like, what do you want me to do?
But more importantly, why is it that you think that the civil service is staffed by racists? Why do you think that the civil service is just riddled with racists? Why is that in the front of your mind?
Probably they would argue because it's overrepresented of white straight males.
Because I was cursed to have an infection on my genitals, that's why.
Yeah.
And I know it was old lady grot bags down the road who did it to me, that's why.
I mean, the civil service are actually evil on this. I have a personal vendetta against them.
Yeah.
Because they issued a diversity internship, and I was at university at the time, ran into a recruiter for this, just thought it was an internship, like any other. Went through the questions, it just said you weren't eligible. I was like, oh, that's weird. So I went home and checked it up, and if you have to either be disabled, have brown skin, or from a economically disadvantaged background.
So being a poor person or being a minority is as disadvantaging as being disabled.
That's the civil service position in hiring for diversity internships.
That's very progressive.
But of course, the point here is, if you're an upper class person with brown skin, you will be accepted for at least trying. They will look at your application. But if you have white skin, no. I was like, how this somehow isn't illegal in the UK.
Oh, hang on a second. I maybe they're right that the civil service is riddled with racists, and the Conservative government maybe does need a method of rooting them out. I would suggest that possibly public support of Jeremy Corbyn might be an indicator that this is in fact a racist, and maybe they could check their social media feeds or something. That's what they're going to replace it with.
I'm all in favour, but honestly, I'd love to get the people who are
Bit
responsible.
of British McCarthyism going on.
The people who are responsible for this ought to be openly denounced. Like,
yeah, well, I mean,
just bring them out and be like, look, what did you do? Like, explain to me why that's not racist.
I think that what they're saying is that they are racist. I think these people might actually be racist. And they seem to be very concerned about racism in all places, in all times, especially in their own organisation. So it's like, okay, you're a bunch of racists. Gotcha.
So there's another statement, someone trying to defend this critical race theory training. So, Mr. Guilford, an advisor to the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development.
Gifford, it is.
Sorry, Gifford, which so just a HR, typical kind of person.
Hang on. So, yeah, advisor to the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development. So, someone whose job is just a make-work job. And if he disappeared tomorrow, things would probably run more smoothly.
Yeah. So, his statement on this in response was, the government should not try and stop to make the workplace more inclusive, and it should not try and reduce barriers to inequality.
I think this guy's a racist.
Sounds
I
like
think
to
that
me.
he's a white supremacist. I think that he has an inherent assumption that white people are more successful and do better than black or brown people, and he thinks that black and brown people are kept out because of this inferiority that they possess. I want to just be very clear. I denounce Mr. Gifford's opinion wholeheartedly, unequivocally. I think the races are equal, and I think that he is a vile man who should be fired.
His next sentence makes this more clear. Is him saying, to dismiss this as political correctness or being woke is a very shaky place to be.
Why?
The fact that he's using the word woke tells me that, okay, you know what's going on here.
Yeah.
You know that this is just racist nonsense.
Yeah.
And you just want to keep it because...
It's woke racism, and you're a woke racist, and you should be fired.
Yeah. Like, there's not much more to say on it. Like, these people are just scum, in my opinion. I can't stand them.
Yeah.
So this is the BBC trying to be neutral on it. This is the right-wing press, The Sun, talking about it, which I find to be more truthful.
Ironically, the Sun becomes a bastion of truth.
Yeah, which, I mean, The Sun and the Daily Mail are terrible 99% of the time. But
Well, I never thought I'd be citing Fox News. Like, if you go back 10 years
yeah.
ago, Fox News was the watchword. That was the way you described how, someone was being a bad journalist. Like, oh, this is like something I read on Fox News.
CNN is that now.
Exactly. It's switched. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
So some of the quotes here. So a quote from the government saying, no evidence that this training challenges behavior in a long term or improves workplace equality. So it does nothing.
Yeah.
Okay. It also states that there is emerging evidence of unintended negative consequences. So that the people who are going through this critical race theory training seem to be getting more racist.
They're actually training them to be racists by raising their racial consciousness. As critical race theorists Kimberly Crenshaw and others have said, that is the point of critical race theory. It is to make them think in racial terms, because you can't exactly analyze the inequalities of racism without considering all of these racial aspects. And yeah, I'm not surprised there are unintended negative consequences.
Like, as anyone who's read their books would know, this is not unintended.
No.
This is the purpose of their training.
Yeah.
Is they want to raise racial consciousness.
Yeah, I mean, like, you can look at like anything about white fragility or any critical race theory, and that they will expressly say that they want there to be a white identity, and they want it to be negative, and this is so they can discriminate on the basis of race against white people without white people objecting to being racially discriminated against. But as someone who's against racial discrimination, why should I accept that? Why should I accept that identity or framing? I don't think of myself as a white person.
It's also just a scumbag thing to do. Like,
doesn't mean anything.
I don't mean to harp on about myself, but
That's all right.
I think I'm 23. Either 23 or 24.
Old man Callum.
I'm not actually sure, but that's the point. When I was born, it was 1997.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, you could argue, maybe, that someone who grew up in the 50s or 60s or 70s or, racist periods in Britain where open racism took place, the government openly discriminated against people on the basis of race. Therefore, you've had some kind of advantage. Therefore, we ought to give the people who didn't have that advantage some kind of leg up because you've had an advantage. Like, I know that the progressives think racism...
Sounds like the origin story of Dan Abbott, doesn't it?
Yeah. I know the racists think the progressives... Freudian slip, think that racism is eternal and will never end, and we will always live in a racist society.
It's inherently baked into the fact that we live in England.
But I think I've got this right. I don't think I've ever lived in a year where racial discrimination has been legal. In which case...
That's a good point.
At what point do you say that this is not this kid's fault? And there's a great image of a Japanese girl, and people saying, are you going to blame her for Pearl Harbor?
Mm-hmm.
Is it her fault? Of course not. In which case, do you blame historic racism on your son, Alexander, who's just been born? Like,
depends how progressive we are.
But this is the absurdity where it's any reasonable person, because the progressives are not reasonable.
Yep.
They're objectively unreasonable.
In fact, we actually have a legal case in America featuring myself in which a progressive was termed as objectively unreasonable. So that's true. Yep.
This needs to die. This worldview in which we say that you need to be punished because of historic wrongdoings.
Yeah.
I don't agree, but could see the argument for someone who lived through a racist period. But for kids, newborn kids today, how is it their fault?
Yeah,
What have they done wrong?
the difference is whether you're looking at the consequences or at the procedure, right? Because they're looking at the consequences and saying, well, because of X, Y, or Z, and even then I think that these are things that you could definitely challenge through argument. But let's not bother with that for now, because the consequences are racial inequality. Therefore, we can change the procedures to be about racial discrimination. And that's only going to guarantee more racism and racial inequality, or a changing of the things, especially as we will come to in a bit, the people who are arguing for these changes and for these racist and otherwise sexist, classist, whatever procedures are not interested in following them themselves. They're simply hypocrites, and I think this is just a means to power.
Absolutely right. Just to move on here, so Ben Bradley is quoted in The Sun. He was one of the MPs, one of the 40.
He's one of the Conservative MPs who's actually any good.
Yeah, he refused to take this. He said, look, this is racist nonsense. We're not paying for this. She had to pay for it as well. And he is quoted, and I want to give him a fair shake because he's done a good job here, saying, I welcome the fact that we are no longer going to be wasting taxpayers' money on it. Yep. So, absolutely right. So
the only thing I am critical of here, right, is the fact that they are saying, well, it doesn't work and it's a waste of money, implying that if it did work, then it wouldn't be a waste of money and therefore it would be fine to subject us all to communist critical race theory training. That's not correct, right? And that's the problem that I have with this, because what it doesn't do is really address the root of the problem, which is the philosophy that we are seeing espoused through it. Even if it did work, let's say that they'd managed to figure out a process that was actually capable of doing it, that's not going to be the only way of reducing racism. I mean, we seem to have reduced racism to minuscule proportions.
Microaggressions.
Yeah, to microaggressions, literally, by just using liberal philosophy. So why do we have to flip into a sort of, mode of communism in order to continue doing this? We should be objecting to that on the basis of what it is and the construction of it, not just for the fact that it's ineffective. The way they go about things is immoral. It's directly opposed to our moral systems, and we shouldn't accept it on that basis. And that's the only criticism really I have for the Conservatives here. It's not good enough to say that practically it didn't work, because what you're saying is principally it was acceptable. Principally it is not acceptable, and you should have addressed it on that level first and then gone on to the practical. But it's all right. You guys can pick that up next time.
You're absolutely right, and I will give credit where credit is due to Kemi, who did do
yes,
that. She said did. This is an evil ideology.
Yes.
Words to that effect.
Yes. She does seem to be fantastic, actually.
Yeah. The response from the left is, of course, never to give up, because why would they? So here's the Guardian asking, well, why would we get rid of witch dumping, even if it doesn't work? So UK ministers criticised for failing to find an alternative to unconscious bias training.
Well, we've got to do something about that racist civil service. They are right. I hear it's full of witches, so we've got to do something.
Just go to the civil service website. You'll find the guys who wrote it.
Yeah.
It's not hard. You don't have to run unconscious bias training on them. They have their names on there. Anyway, so they give a statement in here.
Before we go on, actually, I think it is fair within their own framework to presuppose that these people are racists as well. If they're promoting white fragility, that must mean they're endorsing white fragility. And Robin DiAngelo is explicit in white fragility that every single white person who supports Western liberal democracies and the English common law judgment systems and things like that, that is white supremacy. And therefore, every single one of these people is a white supremacist. So by their own standards, I mean, yeah, I guess the civil service is full of racists. Anyway, moving on.
Yeah, you're right.
What are the racists doing?
So they give a couple of statistics in here, which is why reading multiple sources is always good. Because, of course, the headline's nonsense, their argument's nonsense, but you can get information that's useful. So they give two pieces of information that are worthwhile. A systematic review of unconscious bias training, examining 492 studies involving more than 87,000 participants, found changes to unconscious bias measurements were not associated with changes in behaviour. That's how bad this is. It does not work.
Do you want to know something, though? The chap, I can't remember who it was. I think it was a pair of scientists who created it, they have said, I should have looked this up in advance really, they came out and said years ago that this is not being used for its intended purpose. It's not meant to be like a Thetan reader where you can tell how witchy someone is by giving them this test. Because I mean, I've done one of these unconscious bias tests, and it's hard to know how they know that they're getting the results they think they're getting, because, for example, like you've got to react at certain times. So if you see a white face and a black face, whichever one you react to quicker determines your bias. But is it bias for or against? I mean, if I react quicker to the black face rather than the white face, how do you know that's a bias in favor of the black and against the white? I might be.
Does that show that you love them or you're fearful?
Well, it might be exactly. You don't know, right? You don't know what that means, and you're measuring reaction times in milliseconds, fractions of a second, and so it's just like I might be having a negative biased reaction, but you're recording it and vice versa. So it's like, but they've said this. They've said, look, this is not what this is designed for, and the progressive left is not using this appropriately.
Yeah. So this isn't even a surprise. Like, we've known for ages this is bunk. But the depressing part is the other piece of information they give us, that nearly 170,000 staff across the civil service have taken part in sessions in the past 5 years.
Struggle sessions, yeah.
The curriculum has been scaled up to include 4 modules in diversity and inclusion training.
Yeah, this is the cathedral of leftism working its way through our institutions. The Conservatives should defund all of it.
Yeah, and then to talk about funding, if we can get the Daily Mail one up, they had this was Ben Bradley complaining that it was £7,000 for this course, and they just had a giant blue puppet telling you a racist.
Honestly, that's cheaper than I was expecting. I'm amazed they didn't blow more money on this.
I don't know if this is per MP or whatnot.
Oh, right.
But the course that did this had also done it in the Scottish Parliament and some other of the Gaelic nations. Mm-hmm. So this is just a grift. This is just open grift.
So what you guys should do is go to lotuseast.com and sign up, so we can afford to take this course, and we'll record ourselves doing it and being subjected to the course, so you can find out what's in it if you want.
We don't have to, actually, thanks to the next chap who.
But you do still need to sign up.
Yes, you do. But
Sorry.
So this is a Conservative MP who did not side with Ben Bradley, because he's a little bit subversive, and I quite like this. So he decided to go to the training just to document what was happening.
Right. Okay.
And it's hilarious. So we can't read the whole thing, but we'll put a link in the description for the clips. Yeah. So just some quotes from him. The first hint that something was amiss at my unconscious bias training was the sight of a grown man mimicking a sheep. This. Well,
I mean, starters, you mean to go on, I guess.
Yeah. This was not the sort of teaching session I was expecting. I bet it wasn't. Shortly to follow, an optical illusion about the size of a table, a musical interlude from an Orthodox Jewish rapper, and a random reference to the contestant of The Apprentice.
Okay.
You're getting the point. My 2-hour session was a blizzard of pseudoscience and psychological ghost hunting, knitted together with a barely coherent narrative. Unconscious bias training does not offer wisdom or knowledge.
We're not looking for wisdom or knowledge. We're trying to persuade people that they're racist, so they'll change the entire system that they have in order to better fulfill communist ideals.
But it's great to have.
I'm literal about what I said. That's
you're
literally
totally right.
what they're saying.
This is the purpose, which is why it ends up being such nonsense. But the fact that it's such nonsense, I think, really gets home to anyone who's not too sure, doesn't really know whether or not it's, the purposes behind it are this communist.
You mean Labour supporters, yeah?
Well, more Lib Dems, to be honest. Like, Labour supporters are just open socialists.
True, good point.
But the more normie types, like, if you be looking at this as any layman, would you not be wondering to yourself, why do I pay taxes?
Yes.
Like, what is the point?
It seemed to be theft.
It's absolute theft.